It's been 30 years, but I still see her every time I close my eyes. Not the little girl with the bright red coat, the one the whole country saw on the news. No, I see what was left. Just a shoe, a tiny little sneaker with a worn-out sole, sitting on a bed of pine needles as if a ghost had simply stepped out of it. The rain in Oregon, you see, it washes away everything, evidence, memories, hope, but it couldn't wash that away. That shoe was the period at the end of a sentence we never got to read. They called the case closed, stamped it in big, bold letters on a file thick enough to stop a door. But a closed case isn't the same as a solved one. It just means they got tired of looking. For years, I was the lead detective on the Jane Doe of Highway 101 case. They gave me a fancy title, a government car, and a gut full of ulcers to go with it. We had the location, a desolate stretch of the Oregon coast where the forest is so dense it swallows the daylight whole. We had the date, October 26, 1994. We even had a body, what was left of one, but we never had a name. Just Jane, our Jane, a 5-year-old girl taken while her mother thought she was jogging just a few feet ahead on a foggy coastal morning. That's the official story, anyway. The one that lets everyone sleep at night. The truth is, something else was in those woods. Something that didn't leave footprints. When the mother, a frantic woman named Sarah, told us her daughter Lily just vanished into the fog, we thought it was a simple custody battle, a parental abduction. We searched for days. The volunteers, the state police, even the FBI with their high-tech gear. We found nothing. Not a thread, not a footprint, not a single sign of a struggle. The fog along Highway 101 is legendary. It can roll in from the Pacific and turn day into twilight in a matter of seconds. But this was different. This wasn't just fog. It felt alive. I've been a cop my whole life. I've seen the worst of what people do to each other. But this case, it had a different flavor. The air felt heavy, ancient. Every snapped twig sounded like a whisper. I remember my partner, a young, eager detective named Harris, trying to keep things grounded in reality. "It's the woods, Frank," he'd say, his breath clouding in the damp air. "Animals, terrain, it's easy to get lost." But he couldn't explain the shoe. It was sitting perfectly upright, almost 10 miles from where Lily was last seen, in a part of the forest no 5-year-old could reach on her own. There were no tracks leading to it or away from it. It was just there, as if it had been placed. I've bagged 1,000 pieces of evidence in my career, but my hands shook when I touched that shoe. It felt cold, unnaturally so, like it had been sitting in a freezer, not a forest. That night, back at the precinct, I was poring over topographical maps, trying to make sense of the shoe's location. The coffee was stale, the fluorescent lights buzzed, the usual symphony of a dead-end case. Then the first strange call came in. It was from an old timber crew foreman who'd worked those woods back in the 60s. He'd heard about the missing girl on the news and called the tip line. He sounded terrified, like he was breaking a 30-year-long vow of silence. He told me to stop looking. "You're not going to find her," he rasped, his voice thin and papery. "Nothing that goes in there comes out the same." We learned that the hard way. I tried to press him for details, but he just kept repeating the same cryptic phrase. "The trees have eyes." Then he hung up. I dismissed it as the ramblings of an old man, maybe a little senile, a little drunk. Cops get calls like that all the time. But then a second call came, and a third. All from different people, a retired park ranger, a woman who grew up in a nearby town, and all with the same chilling message. They spoke of things that didn't make sense. Of whispers on the wind when there was no breeze. Of seeing movement in the periphery that was gone when you turned your head. They talked about the forest as if it were a living, breathing entity. An entity that sometimes got hungry. I'm a man of logic, of facts and evidence. I believe in things I can see and touch. But as the days turned into weeks and the case grew colder, the line between logic and the whispers from the woods began to blur. The official report says Jane Doe, age 5, was likely abducted and her body never found. The file was closed due to a lack of leads, but I know what I felt out there. I know the unnatural silence of that forest, and I know that shoe wasn't left by any human. What really happened on Highway 101 in 1994 is a story you won't find in any police report. It's a story that starts with a little girl in a red coat and ends in a place where the rules of our world no longer apply. My name is Frank Miller. If you Google me, you'll probably find a grainy photo from a retirement party I didn't want, holding a plaque I didn't earn. They say time heals all wounds, but they don't tell you that it also sharpens the memories you're desperate to forget. After the official search was called off, I didn't stop. I couldn't. Sarah, the mother, had this look in her eyes hollowed out like a house after a fire. She stayed in that cheap motel off the highway for 3 months, just waiting. Every morning she'd drive to the trailhead, sit on the hood of her car, and stare into the tree line. I'd go check on her, bring her coffee she wouldn't drink. We were 2 ghosts haunting the same graveyard. I heard her last night, Frank, she told me one Tuesday, her voice devoid of any emotion. She was calling for me. From the trees. It was probably the wind, Sarah, I said, though the hair on my arms stood up. Or a coyote. No, she whispered, turning to look at me. Her eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with dark circles. She said, "Mama, the tall man is watching." I froze. The tall man. It wasn't the first time I'd heard that. In the weeks following the disappearance, we had interviewed every local within a 20-mile radius. Most were helpful, offering prayers or alibis. But there were a few, the ones who lived off the grid in cabins rotting with moss, who mentioned him. Not a suspect exactly. More like a local legend, a boogeyman to scare kids into staying close to the porch. They described him as a shadow that stretched too long in the evening light, a figure seen standing perfectly still amongst the Douglas firs, blending in until he moved. We dismissed it. Detectives don't chase folklore. We chase license plates and DNA. But that night, after leaving Sarah, I drove back to the spot where we found the shoe. I parked my cruiser on the shoulder, killing the engine. The silence of the Oregon coast is heavy, oppressive. It's not empty. It's full of things holding their breath. I rolled down the window. The smell of salt and damp earth filled the car. I just sat there, listening. I don't know what I expected. A confession from the trees? A clue dropped from the sky? Instead, I got a feeling. A prickling sensation at the base of my skull, the kind you get when you know you're not alone. I grabbed my flashlight, a heavy maglite, standard issue back then, and stepped out. The beam cut a cone through the fog, illuminating swirling mist and the gnarled trunks of ancient spruce trees. I walked into the woods, my boots sinking into the soft, wet ground. I walked until the road noise faded, until the only sound was my own breathing. I reached the clearing where the shoe had been found. It looked innocuous now, just a patch of ferns and dirt. But then I saw it. About 10 feet up the trunk of a massive cedar tree, there was a mark, not a scratch from a bear, not a rub from a deer. It was a carving, fresh. The bark had been peeled back to reveal the pale wood underneath. I shone my light on it. It was a symbol I didn't recognize, 3 intersecting circles, crude but deliberate. And right in the center, stuck into the wood with a force that must have been immense, was a small, pink plastic barrette. I knew that barrette. It was in the description Sarah gave us. A little butterfly clip Lily had been wearing in her hair. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was impossible. We had scoured this area. We had dogs, we had grid searches. Every inch of this ground had been covered. This tree hadn't been marked 3 days ago. Someone had come back. Someone was taunting us. I reached up to pull it free, but stopped. Evidence. I needed to bag it. As I fumbled for my kit, a sound cut through the stillness. A snap. Loud, deliberate. Like a dry branch being broken over a knee. It came from behind me, deeper in the woods. "Police!" I shouted, spinning around, the beam of my light dancing wildly. "Identify yourself." Silence. Then another snap. Closer this time. To my left. I said, "Identify yourself." My hand went to my holster. The gun felt cold and reassuring in my grip. Then came the laugh. It wasn't a human laugh. It didn't sound like it came from a throat. It sounded like rustling leaves, like stones grinding together. It was high-pitched, erratic, and it seemed to come from everywhere at once. It wasn't mocking. It was playful, like a child playing hide-and-seek. "Come out!" I yelled, my voice cracking. The laughter stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was worse. It was the silence of a predator deciding when to strike. I backed away, keeping the light trained on the darkness. I'm not ashamed to admit I was terrified. There is a primal fear that lives in our DNA, a remnant from when we were the ones being hunted. It woke up in me that night. I retreated to the car, keeping my back to the road. I drove back to town faster than I should have, the tires screaming on the wet asphalt. I bagged the barrette the next morning with the team, but when we went back to the tree, the carving was gone. Not grown over, not hidden. Gone. The bark was smooth, unbroken, ancient. The barrette was real. It was in my evidence bag, but the place I found it had simply erased itself. Harris looked at me like I'd finally cracked. "Frank, maybe you saw a shadow." "It was dark. You were tired." "I held the damn thing, Harris." I slammed the evidence bag on his desk. "I pulled this out of the wood, and the symbol. I saw it clearly." "What symbol?" I drew it for him on a notepad. The 3 intersecting circles. Harris frowned. He picked up the pad, turning it over. "That's not gang-related. Not a cult, far as I know. Looks like geometry." He was right. It looked mathematical, precise. It didn't fit the profile of a drifter or a predator. It fit something else entirely. We sent the barrette to the lab. They found fingerprints, but they were too small to be an adult's, and they didn't match Lily's. They matched nothing. The lab report said the prints had anomalous ridge patterns. When I asked the tech what that meant, he just shrugged and said, "It means whoever or whatever touched this doesn't have fingers like you or me." That was the moment the case went from a missing person to a classified file. The suits from D.C. showed up 2 days later. Not FBI. These guys didn't have badges. They wore gray suits that didn't fit quite right and drove sedan cars with government plates. They took the evidence. All of it. The shoe, the barrette, my notes. They told Sarah the investigation was being elevated to a federal task force. A nice way of saying buried, but they made a mistake. They didn't take everything. I had kept a copy of the symbol, and I had the name of the old timber foreman who called me that first night. His name was Elias Thorne. I found his address in the phone book, a scribbled entry for a trailer park on the edge of the reservation. I went to see him on a Sunday. The rain was coming down in sheets. Elias was sitting on his porch, whittling a piece of driftwood. He didn't look up when I walked up the steps. "Took you long enough," he grunted. "You knew I'd come?" "The ones who see the signs always come." He looked up then. His eyes were milky white, lined from cataracts or age, but he looked right at me. "You saw the circles, didn't you?" "How do you know about that?" "Because I saw them too," Elias said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Back in '62, before the big storm, before the other children went missing." "Other children?" I asked, feeling the chill return. There are no records of other missing kids in this area. Elias laughed, a dry, wheezing sound. "Records?" You think paper remembers? The forest remembers, detective. The forest keeps count. 1962, 1978, 1986, and now 1994. Every 8 years. Like clockwork. They take one to keep the door open. What door? Elias pointed with his knife toward the tree line, dark and imposing against the gray sky. The door between here and where they come from. The tall men, they aren't ghosts, son. And they aren't men. They're gardeners. And we're just the crop. I wanted to dismiss him. I wanted to tell him he was crazy. But the barrette, the symbol, the anomalous prince, it all pointed to something structured, something recurring. I sat down on the damp steps next to him. Tell me everything, I said. And he did. He told me a story that sounded like madness, but felt like the truth. He talked about lights in the sky that weren't stars, about hums that vibrated in your teeth, about children who were returned days later, but were wrong, empty, like someone had scooped them out and put something else inside. You have to find the cycle, Elias said. If you want to find the girl, you have to understand the cycle. But be careful. When you stare into the woods stare back. And they don't blink. I left Elias with a head full of nightmares and a notebook full of dates. I went to the library archives. I started pulling microfiche from 1962, and there it was, buried on page 4 of a local paper. Boy 6 vanishes near logging camp. Search called off after week. 1978. Girl lost in state park. 1986. Family camping trip turns tragic. Toddler disappears. The pattern was real. Every 8 years. October. The foggy season. I wasn't just looking for a kidnapper anymore. I was hunting a phenomenon, and I was running out of time. If Elias was right, the door wouldn't stay open forever. I had to go back into those woods. Alone, without a badge, without backup. Just me and the truth. But I wasn't prepared for what was waiting for me. I wasn't prepared for the fog that didn't behave like weather. I wasn't prepared to find out that Highway 101 isn't just a road. It's a boundary line. And I was about to cross it. The library basement smelled of dust and decaying paper, a smell I usually found comforting, like old law books. But that day, it smelled like a graveyard of forgotten children. I spent 3 nights there, sleeping in my car, living off vending machine coffee and stale sandwiches. I built a timeline on the back of a map of Tillamook County. The dots connected in a way that made my stomach turn. The disappearances weren't random. They formed a spiral, moving inland from the coast, tightening with every 8-year cycle. And the center of that spiral? A place called Dead Man's Hollow, a deep ravine about 5 miles east of Highway 101. It wasn't on the tourist maps. It was old growth, protected land, technically off limits due to unstable terrain. But looking at the topographical data, I saw something else. The ravine was a natural amphitheater. Acoustics there would be strange. Sound would carry, or maybe get trapped. I needed gear, not police issue. I needed things that wouldn't fail if the batteries died. I bought a mechanical compass, a hunting knife, climbing rope, and a flare gun. I also went to a pawn shop and bought a Geiger counter. Elias had mentioned a hum and a sickness that came after the lights. Radiation seemed like a plausible explanation for the physical symptoms, even if the source was insane. I didn't tell Harris. I didn't tell Sarah. This was a one-way trip if I was wrong, and a career ender if I was right. On the morning of November 2nd, 7 days since, Lily vanished. I parked my truck on an old logging road overgrown with blackberry bushes. The fog was thick, a wall of white that muffled the world. I checked my compass. North was drifting. The needle wasn't steady. It swayed, lazy and drunken. refusing to settle. Great, I muttered. Magnetic anomalies. Just like the Bermuda Triangle, but with more pine trees. I hiked for 4 hours. The terrain was brutal steep inclines, slick with mud, fallen giants of trees blocking the path. But the closer I got to the coordinates of the hollow, the quieter it got. The birds stopped singing. The wind died. It was a vacuum of silence. Then I found the first marker. It wasn't a carving this time. It was a structure. Someone or something had woven saplings together into an archway. It wasn't tied with rope. The wood itself was twisted, fused together as if it had grown that way overnight. It stood about 7 feet high. Hanging from the center of the arch was a single object swaying gently in the stagnant air. I approached it slowly, the Geiger counter clicking rhythmically at my hip. The clicks sped up as I got closer. Click, 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 click. Radiation, low levels, but present. I reached out with my gloved hand to touch the object. It was a toy. A plastic action figure, faded by the sun, missing an arm. It looked like it had been there for decades. I turned it over. On the back, scratched into the plastic, were initials. TJ62. Tommy Jenkins, the boy from the 1962 article. The first one in the cycle. My breath hitched. This was a trophy. A shrine. I was walking through a graveyard of toys. I pushed past the archway, and the forest changed. The trees here were different twisted, black-barked, their leaves a sickly shade of purple-green. The air tasted metallic, like sucking on a penny. The Geiger counter was buzzing angrily now. I switched it off to silence the noise, relying on my instincts. The ground sloped downward sharply. I was entering the hollow. At the bottom, the fog cleared. It was like stepping out of a cloud into the eye of a hurricane. The ravine floor was flat, covered in a strange gray moss. And in the center, there was a stone. A monolith, really. Black, obsidian-like rock, jutting out of the earth at a sharp angle. It didn't belong here. It didn't belong in Oregon. It looked like a piece of a meteorite. And sitting at the base of the stone, curled into a ball, was a small figure in a red coat. "Lily!" I screamed, forgetting caution, forgetting the tall man, forgetting everything but the child. I scrambled down the slope, sliding on the loose shale. She didn't move. I reached her, falling to my knees. I touched her shoulder. She was warm. Thank God she was warm. "Lily, honey, it's Frank. It's the police. You're safe." She turned over. And for a second, my heart stopped. Her eyes were open, but they weren't looking at me. They were looking through me. Her pupils were blown wide, swallowing the iris. And she was smiling. A beatific, terrifying smile. "He said you would come," she whispered. Her voice sounded older. Wrong. He said the man with the badge would bring the key. Who? Who said that? I scanned the tree line, my hand gripping the flare gun. "The Star Man." She pointed up at the gray sky. "He wants to go home. But the door is locked." I grabbed her, pulling her into my arms. She was light, too light. "We're going home, Lily. To your mom." "No," she said, her voice flat. "Not there. Home is up." I stood up, hoisting her onto my hip. "We're leaving. Now." That's when the hum started. It wasn't a sound. It was a vibration. I felt it in my teeth, in the fillings of my molars. The black stone began to glow, not with light, but with absence. It seemed to suck the light out of the air around it. A low, thrumming pulse emanated from it. And then, from the trees surrounding the hollow, they stepped out. 3 of them. They were tall, impossibly tall, 7, maybe 8 feet. They wore what looked like suits, but the fabric shimmered like oil on water. Their faces were blank smooth, pale ovals with no eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just blank. I fumbled for the flare gun, my hands shaking so hard I almost dropped Lily. Stay back. I yelled. I swear to God, I'll burn this whole forest down. A figure in the center tilted its head. A voice echoed in my mind, not in my ears, but inside my skull. It was like a migraine given a voice. The key is here. The cycle must close. I'm not a key. I shouted, backing away toward the slope. I'm a detective, and I'm taking this girl. The girl is the vessel. You are the key. The one on the right raised a hand. It had too many fingers. Long, spindly digits that rippled like sea anemones. A beam of light pure, white, blinding light shot from its palm. It hit the ground inches from my feet, turning the moss into ash instantly. I didn't think. I reacted. I raised the flare gun and fired. Not at them. At the stone. The red phosphorus flare hit the black obsidian with a thwack. For a second, nothing happened. Then, the stone screamed. It was a sound of tearing metal, of breaking glass on a cosmic scale. The red light of the flare seemed to react with the black rock, creating a violent chemical fizzing. The tall men recoiled. They seemed pained by the noise or the light. The hum turned into a screech. Interference. Anomaly detected. Run, Lily. I didn't know if she could run, but I couldn't carry her and climb. Climb. Go. She just stood there, staring at the burning stone. Pretty, she murmured. I grabbed her by the collar of her coat and hauled her up the slope. The ground was shaking now. The trees were swaying as if in a gale, but there was no wind. I clawed my way up the mud, dragging the girl with me. Behind us, the light from the stone was pulsing faster, turning from black to a violent, sickly purple. We crested the ridge just as a shockwave hit. It knocked the wind out of me, throwing us face first into the dirt. I looked back. The hollow was gone. It was just gone, replaced by a swirling vortex of fog and light. The trees around the rim were being pulled in, roots and all, sucked into the earth. I scrambled to my feet, scooped up Lily, and ran. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs felt like lead. I didn't look back. I didn't stop for the compass. I just ran downhill, towards the sound of the ocean. When we finally burst out onto the highway, stumbling onto the pavement, a semi-truck swerved to miss us, its horn blaring. The driver jumped out, swearing, but stopped when he saw us. A cop covered in mud, holding a girl who had been missing for a week. We were safe, or so I thought. They took us to the hospital. Sarah was there in 20 minutes, weeping, hysterical with relief. The doctors checked Lily. Physically, she was fine. Dehydrated, a few scratches, but unharmed. But she didn't speak. Not a word. She just sat in the hospital bed, staring at the static on the TV screen. I was debriefed. I lied. I told them I found her wandering near a logging road. I left out the stone, the tall men, the telepathic voices. I knew what happens to cops who talk about aliens. They get a padded room. The case was closed. Hero cop finds missing girl. Headlines, handshakes, a commendation. But I knew it wasn't over. 2 days after she came home, Sarah called me. She was whispering. "Frank," she said. "She's drawing pictures." "That's good, Sarah." "Therapy." "No, she's drawing circles. 3 intersecting circles. And she keeps pointing at the window and saying, 'They're waiting for the key.'" I looked out my own window. Down on the street, under the streetlight, a gray sedan was parked. It had been there for 2 hours. The cycle hadn't ended. I had just interrupted it. And now they knew who I was. The true horror wasn't in the woods. It was just beginning. The sedan outside my window wasn't there to intimidate me. It was there to listen. I pulled the blinds shut, my hands shaking just enough to notice. They were tapped. The phone, the walls, maybe even the damn television. That night, I sat in the dark of my living room with a bottle of scotch I didn't open, watching the shadows lengthen across the floor. I was a cop who had just committed a dozen felonies, kidnapping being the least of them in the eyes of whoever those suits were. But I had Lily back. She was alive. Or was she? Sarah called me again 3 days later. Her voice was brittle, like dry leaves. "Frank, you need to come over. She's speaking." "That's great, Sarah. What did she say?" "Not English, Frank. And not with her voice." I drove over. The house felt colder than the outside air. Sarah led me to Lily's room. The little girl was sitting on the floor, surrounded by sheets of paper covered in those same intersecting circles. She was humming, a low, dissonant sound that made my teeth ache, just like the stone in the forest. When I walked in, she stopped. She looked up at me, and for a second, her eyes were normal. "Blue, scared, childish. Mr. Frank," she whispered. "The tall man is angry. He says you stole his seed." "I didn't steal anything, sweetie. I saved you." She shook her head violently. "No, you broke the planting. Now the harvest will be bad." I knelt down. "Lily, listen to me. Who is telling you this?" She pointed to the corner of the room, to the empty space where the shadows were thickest. Him. There was nothing there. But as I stared, the shadows seemed to ripple, like heat haze on asphalt. I stood up, hand instinctively going to my hip, but I wasn't wearing my gun. I was retired. I was a civilian. I was prey. "We need to get her out of here," I told Sarah. "Pack a bag. We're going to my cabin up north." We left that night. I took back roads, avoiding the highways, checking my rearview mirror every 30 seconds. The gray sedan followed us for 10 miles, then peeled off. That worried me more than if it had stayed. It meant they knew where we were going. Or they didn't care. My cabin was in the Cascades, miles from the coast, miles from the fog. I thought distance would help. I was wrong. The second night there, I woke up to the sound of scratching. It was coming from the roof, rhythmically. Scrape, 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 like metal on wood. I grabbed my shotgun, the one thing I hadn't surrendered, and went outside. The air was freezing. The moon was full, casting long, sharp shadows across the snow. I looked up at the roof. Nothing, just snow and shingles. But then I looked down. In the snow around the cabin, there were footprints, not human. They were long, narrow, with no toe separation. And they didn't lead to the cabin or away from it. They just appeared. A ring of them, circling the house. A perfect circle. I went back inside and locked the door. Sarah was in the kitchen, clutching a mug of tea. Lily was asleep on the couch. "Did you see anything?" Sarah asked. "Just a bear," I lied. "Go back to bed." But I didn't sleep. I sat by the fire, watching the flames, trying to make sense of Ilias's words. Every 8 years. To keep the door open. If I had stopped the ritual, if I had taken the vessel before the cycle was complete, what happened to the door? Was it closed? Or was it stuck open? The answer came the next morning. I drove into the nearest town to get supplies and use a payphone. I called an old contact at the state police, a guy who owed me a favor. "Frank? Jesus? Where have you been?" "The feds are tearing the department apart looking for you." "I'm fine, Jack. Listen, I need you to check something. The coordinates I gave you for the hollow. Has anyone been out there?" "Frank, the hollow is gone." "What do you mean, gone?" "I mean, it's a crater. A landslide took out the whole north face of the ridge 2 days ago. Geologists are saying it was a microquake. But Frank, the readings. They're picking up radiation. Like Chernobyl levels. My blood ran cold. Jack, listen to me. Don't let anyone go down there. Do you hear me? Quarantine it. Too late. A team of USGS guys went in yesterday. They haven't reported back. I hung up. The phone booth felt like a coffin. I looked out at the sleepy mountain town. People walking dogs, buying coffee. They had no idea. They were living on the edge of a precipice, and the ground was crumbling. I drove back to the cabin. When I pulled up, the front door was open. My heart hammered against my ribs. I grabbed the shotgun from the passenger seat and ran inside. Sarah. Silence. The fire was dead. The furniture was overturned. The walls were covered in drawings, hundreds of them, done in charcoal from the fireplace. Circles, spirals, and eyes. Thousands of eyes staring out from the wood. I found Sarah in the bedroom. She was sitting on the bed, rocking back and forth. She was unharmed, physically, but her mind was gone. She was just repeating one word, over and over. Hollow, hollow, hollow. Where is she, Sarah? Where is Lily? She pointed to the window, to the forest. I ran outside. The snow was disturbed. A single set of small footprints led away from the cabin into the trees. But they weren't alone. Flanking them on either side were the long, narrow prints I had seen the night before. They weren't dragging her. She was walking with them. I followed the tracks. I ran until my chest burned, until the sun began to set, casting the world in a blood-red light. I tracked them for miles, deeper into the wilderness than I had ever been. The trees here were ancient, massive, and they were silent. No birds, no wind. Then I saw it, not the hollow, not a stone, but a structure. It looked like a radio tower, but it was made of organic material, bone, wood, woven together with something that looked like black veins. It pulsed with a faint purple light, and standing at the base of it was Lily. She was holding hands with two of the tall men. Lily! I screamed, raising the shotgun. She turned. Her face was no longer a child's face. It was serene, ageless. Go back, Frank, she said. Her voice boomed through the clearing, shaking the snow from the trees. I am home now. That's not your home. You're a human being. I was, she said, but the vessel was too small. We have expanded it. One of the tall men turned to look at me. It raised a hand. I fired. The buckshot hit the creature in the chest. It didn't even flinch. The black material of its suit just absorbed the impact. Irrelevant, the voice in my head said. The bridge is built. The tower began to hum. The purple light intensified, shooting a beam straight up into the darkening sky. The clouds swirled, opening up a hole. And through that hole, I saw something. A city? A machine? Massive, geometric shapes floating in a void of stars that weren't stars. I fell to my knees. The sheer scale of it crushed me. We are so small, so incredibly small. Lily looked at me one last time. Don't worry, Frank. We aren't here to conquer. We are here to farm. And the light swallowed them. The tower, the creatures, the girl. They dissolved into the beam and shot upward. The hole in the sky snapped shut with a thunderclap that knocked me flat. Silence returned. The tower was gone. The snow was melted in a perfect circle where it had stood. I walked back to the cabin alone. I took Sarah to a hospital in Seattle. She never spoke another sensible word. She spent the rest of her life staring at the static on TV screens, waiting for a signal. I burned my files. I sold the cabin. I moved to a city where the lights never go out, where there are no trees to hide the tall things. But I know they're still here. Every 8 years, I watch the news. I see the faces of the missing children. And I know they are still farming. And the harvest is getting bigger. They closed the Jane Doe case. But in my head, it's always open. Because I know what happened to Jane Doe. She didn't die. She graduated. 30 years is a long time to run, but it's not long enough to forget. I thought the city would drown out the memories. The noise of traffic, the neon lights, the sheer mass of humanity. For a while, it worked. I drank too much, slept too little, and convinced myself that what I saw in that Oregon forest was a delusion born of stress and grief. I even got married briefly. But Sarah's face, blank and staring at the static, haunted every quiet moment. Then the letters started arriving. No return address. Postmarked from places like Astoria, Coos Bay, Newport towns dotted along the Oregon coast. Inside, just coordinates. No threats, no messages. Just longitude and latitude scribbled on napkins or torn pages from the Bible. I ignored the first three. The fourth one came with a photo. It was a Polaroid, grainy and dark. It showed a tree, a massive, ancient Sitka spruce with a carving on it. 3 intersecting circles. And beneath the symbol, fresh sap running like blood, was a date, October 26, 2026. Next year, the next cycle. The letter arrived on my doorstep in Chicago 3 months ago. It shattered the fragile peace I'd built. The date wasn't just any date. It would be exactly 32 years since Lily vanished. 4 cycles of 8 years. And if Elias Thorne was right, the harvest got bigger every time. I couldn't ignore it. I'm an old man now. My knees ache when it rains, and my hands aren't as steady as they used to be. But I still have the shotgun. And I still have the notebook. I packed a bag, told my landlord I was going fishing, and started driving west. I didn't go straight to Oregon. I went to Pennsylvania first. Why? Because in my years of obsessive research, buried in the back pages of internet forums where insomniacs trade ghost stories, I found a mention of another Dead Man's Hollow. This one was near McKeesport, Pennsylvania, a conservation area with a history of suspicious drownings, shadowy presences, and factory ruins reclaimed by nature. It sounded too familiar. I spent a week hiking the trails there. It was eerie. Yes, the ruins of the old pipe factory looked like the bones of a dead civilization. But it didn't have the hum. The trees didn't watch you. It felt haunted by ghosts of men, not by whatever the tall men were. But on my last day, I met a local historian, a guy named Arthur, who ran a small museum out of his garage. "You looking for the factory stories?" he asked, eyeing my hiking boots. "I'm looking for patterns," I said. "Disappearances. Strange lights." Arthur went quiet. He unlocked a drawer in his desk and pulled out a dusty file. "We don't talk about the lights. Bad for tourism. But back in '94, same year your girl went missing out west, we had a hiker vanish. Found his camera a month later. The film was weird." He showed me the developed photos. Most were blurry shots of trees, but the last one stopped my heart. It was a picture of the sky, taken from the ground looking up. And in the gap between the trees, the stars were bright. They formed a geometric pattern. 3 intersecting circles. It wasn't just Oregon. It was a network. I left Pennsylvania with a new theory. The door wasn't just a hole in the ground. It was a grid. A series of weak points in the reality of our world, connected by, what? Ley lines? Magnetic fields? Or something we didn't have a word for yet. I drove across the country, stopping at every mystery spot and Gravity Hill along the way. I felt like a pilgrim on an unholy crusade. By the time I hit the Oregon border, the familiar dread was back, sitting heavy in my gut. I didn't go to Watkins or Highway 101. I went to Cape Disappointment, just across the river in Washington. There's a place there called Dead Man's Cove, a beautiful, deadly little beach where shipwrecks used to pile up. I rented a cabin nearby. I needed to be close, but not in the zone. Not yet. I spent my days monitoring police scanners and local news. Nothing unusual. Just the typical coastal quiet. But at night, I'd sit on the porch and listen. The ocean sounded different here. It didn't crash. It thudded, like a heavy heartbeat. 2 nights ago, I went into a local dive bar for a burger. The TV was playing the news. A reporter was standing in front of a familiar stretch of forest. "Breaking news," the anchor said. "Search and rescue teams are deploying tonight near Oswald West State Park after a family of 4 failed to return from a day hike. Authorities say their car was found at the trailhead, unlocked with all belongings inside." I dropped my fork. Oswald West. It was 20 miles south of the original site. The spiral was moving. And it was early. The date on the photo said 2026. Why were they taking people now, in 2025? I paid my tab and ran to my car. I drove south, crossing the Astoria-Megler Bridge. The fog was waiting for me. It rolled over the bridge like a tsunami, swallowing the lights of the car. I knew I shouldn't go. I wasn't a cop anymore. I was an old man with a shotgun and a head full of bad memories. But I couldn't let another family become crop. I pulled off the highway near the state park entrance. It was blocked by police cruisers. Blue and red lights flashed in the mist, creating a strobe effect that made the trees look like they were dancing. I parked down a logging road and hiked in, bypassing the blockade. The woods were exactly as I remembered, silent, watchful. The moss muffled my footsteps. I didn't need a compass this time. I could feel it. A pull in my chest, like a magnet drawing iron filings. I walked for an hour. Then I heard it. Not a scream. A song. It was a nursery rhyme, being hummed by multiple voices. "Ring around the rosy, a pocket full of posies." I crept closer, hiding behind a massive fern. In a small clearing, illuminated by a soft, purple glow coming from the ground itself, was the family. A mother, a father, and 2 young boys. They were standing in a circle, holding hands. Their eyes were closed, and they were swaying. And in the center of their circle stood a figure. It wasn't a tall man. It was smaller, human-sized. It was wearing a red coat that was far too small for it, the sleeves ripping at the shoulders. It turned its head, and I saw the face. It was Lily, but it wasn't the Lily I saved. It wasn't the Lily who went up in the beam. This was a husk. Her skin was gray, papery. Her eyes were gone, replaced by pools of black liquid. "Ashes, ashes," she crooned, her voice sounding like 2 stones rubbing together. We all fall down. The family collapsed simultaneously, as if their strings had been cut. They hit the ground hard, unconscious. Then Lily, or the thing wearing her memory, looked directly at my hiding spot. "Hello, Frank," she said. "You're late for the harvest." I stepped out, racking the slide of my shotgun. "Let them go. They are already seated," she said, gesturing to the unconscious family. "They will dream of the Star City until the door opens fully. Next year, the great opening. I won't let you take them. You can't stop it, Frank. You never could. You are just—" "Fertilizer?" She raised a hand. The ground beneath me erupted. Roots, thick, black, oily roots shot up from the earth, wrapping around my ankles. I fired the shotgun, blowing a hole in the nearest root, spraying black ichor everywhere, but more came. They coiled around my legs, my waist, pinning my arms. I struggled, screaming, but it was useless. The roots tightened, dragging me down. "Don't worry," the thing that was Lily said, walking towards me. "We won't waste you. You have seen the patterns. You understand the geometry. You will make an excellent scribe." She placed a cold gray hand on my forehead. "Sleep, Frank, and dream of the circles." The world went black. The last thing I heard was the sound of the ocean, thudding like a heart that had stopped beating. I woke up to the smell of damp earth and the taste of iron in my mouth. My head throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache that matched the pulsing of the roots still coiled around my legs. But I wasn't in the forest anymore. At least, not the forest I knew. I was underground. Or maybe inside something that just felt like underground. The air was thick, humid, and smelled of ozone and rotting flowers. The only light came from the walls themselves, veins of that sickly purple luminescence pulsing through what looked like black obsidian rock. I tried to move, but the roots held fast. I was suspended upright, my back pressed against a cold, smooth surface. I looked around. I wasn't alone. To my left and right, stretching out into the dim distance, were hundreds of others. Men, women, children. Some looked like they had been there for decades, their clothes rotted away, their skin gray and translucent. Others looked like they had just arrived hikers in North Face jackets, campers in flannel. All of them were asleep, their heads lolling forward, their eyes closed. And connecting us all was a network of those black roots. They weren't just restraining us, they were feeding on us. Or maybe, feeding us. I could feel a cold sensation trickling into my veins where the roots dug into my skin. It felt like ice water, numbing my fear, dulling my thoughts. "Don't fight it, Frank." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. I lifted my head. Standing in front of me was Lily. Or rather, the echo of Lily. She was still wearing the tattered red coat, but now she seemed taller, more regal. Her feet didn't quite touch the ground. "Where am I?" I croaked. My throat felt like sandpaper. "You are in the root system," she said, her voice calm, almost clinical. "The foundation of the bridge. You're killing these people." "No," she corrected gently. "We are preserving them. They are the battery, the anchor. Without them, the door would snap shut, and the connection to the Star City would be lost. They are useful." She walked closer, her black eyes scanning my face. "You, however, are different. You resisted the song. You saw the geometry and didn't go mad. That is rare. Why are you doing this?" I asked, struggling against the bonds. "Why here? Why us?" Lily smiled, a gesture that didn't reach her dead eyes. "Because this planet is a crossroads, a thin spot in the skin of the universe. We have been tending this garden for eons. We plant the seeds, the monoliths, the stones, and every 8 years, we harvest the energy to keep our own world from dying. It is a simple exchange. A few thousand lives for the survival of a civilization." "A few thousand?" I spat. "You're monsters. We are gardeners," she repeated. "And you have a choice, Frank. You can join the battery, sleep like the others, and dream of beautiful things. Or you can help us expand. Go to hell." She sighed, a sound like wind through dry grass. "Pity. You would have made a fine overseer. The human mind is fragile, but yours has scar tissue. It makes you tough." She turned to walk away. "Enjoy the dream, Frank. The great opening begins in 24 hours. Once the bridge is fully formed, none of this will matter." She faded into the gloom, leaving me alone with the sleeping army. I pulled at my restraints. The roots were as hard as steel. But as I struggled, I noticed something. The ice water sensation. It wasn't just numbing me. It was connecting me. I closed my eyes and focused on the cold feeling. Suddenly, images flooded my mind, flashes of memories that weren't mine. A birthday party in 1982. A hiking trip in 1999. The smell of a mother's perfume. The terror of seeing a shadow move in the woods. I was tapped into the network. I could feel them all. The victims of the hollows. The crop. And deep down, buried under layers of forced sleep, I felt something else. Anger. It was a quiet, simmering rage. The collective scream of thousands of stolen lives. They weren't just batteries. They were prisoners, and prisoners want to break out. I focused harder. I tried to push my own thoughts down the line, like sending a signal through a wire. Wake up. Nothing. The roots pulsed, pushing the sedative deeper. Wake up. I screamed it in my mind, channeling every ounce of fury, every regret. Every nightmare I'd had for 30 years. They are using you. Wake up and fight. To my left, a finger twitched. A man in a faded denim jacket, the hiker from Pennsylvania Arthur told me about, lifted his head an inch. His eyes fluttered open. They were milky white, blind, but he turned towards me. "Frank," he whispered. It wasn't his voice. It was Elias Thorne's. My heart skipped. "Elias, you're dead. You died 10 years ago." "The forest remembers, Frank." The hiker's mouth moved, but the voice was the old foreman's. "We are all here. The roots connect us to the earth, and the earth remembers everything. How do I stop this?" I asked mentally. "How do I break the bridge?" "The song," Elias whispered through the stranger. "They use the song to keep us asleep. You have to change the tune. You have to introduce dissonance. I don't know how." "You have the shotgun, Frank," Elias said. "Not the metal one. The one in your mind. The one you used to burn the stone. You have to reject their reality. Force your own upon them." I understood. It wasn't about bullets. It was about will. The tall men, the Star City, it was a psychic construct overlaid on our world. They were bending reality with their minds. I had to bend it back. I closed my eyes again. I visualized the symbol, the 3 intersecting circles. But instead of accepting it, I visualized breaking it. I saw the circles snapping, the lines untangling. I imagined the sound of the flare gun hitting the stone. That tearing, screeching noise. I projected that sound with everything I had. I screamed it into the psychic void. Screech! The effect was instant. The purple light in the cavern flickered. The roots around my legs spasmed. All around me, the sleepers began to thrash. The harmonious hum of the cave turned into a chaotic discord. Lily reappeared, materializing out of thin air. Her face was twisted in shock. "Stop it," she shrieked. "You are corrupting the signal." "I'm not corrupting it," I gritted out, sweat pouring down my face. "I'm changing the channel." I pushed harder. I remembered the fear I felt that first night in the woods. I weaponized it. I sent a wave of pure, unadulterated human terror down the line. The roots began to wither. The black veins turned gray and brittle. The man next to me ripped his arm free with a wet tear. Then another. Then another. The battery was waking up. "No!" Lily screamed. The red coat ripped apart, revealing a body made of pure, blinding light. "You cannot stop the harvest." She raised her hand to strike me, to burn me out of existence, but she was too late. The man in the denim jacket, Elias, lunged. He didn't have a weapon. He just had rage. He tackled the glowing figure, tackling her to the ground. And then the others joined in. Dozens, then hundreds of the waking dead, swarming over their captor, tearing at the light with bare hands. The cavern began to shake. The ceiling cracked. Real dirt, cold and wet, started to fall. The illusion was breaking. We were coming back to the real world. I felt the roots around me snap. I fell forward, hitting the muddy floor of a cave. The purple light died, replaced by the pitch black of deep earth. But I wasn't afraid of the dark. I had my shotgun, and I had an army. "Let's go," I said to the darkness. "Let's go find the gardener." I don't know how long we walked in that cave system. Time, like light, seemed to bend down there. Elias, or the man whose body Elias was inhabiting, led the way. He moved with the confidence of a man who had built the tunnels, not just haunted them. We were an army of the damned, me with my spectral shotgun, and about 50 wakers who had managed to tear themselves free from the roots. They were weak, stumbling, some still half-blind from decades of darkness, but they were driven by a collective fury that burned brighter than any torch. "We're getting close," Elias rasped, pausing at a fork in the tunnel. "Can you feel it, Frank?" I could. The air was getting warmer. The smell of ozone was replaced by something metallic, like a soldering iron. And the hum. The hum was deafening now. It wasn't just a sound. It was a physical pressure pushing against my eardrums. "What is down here?" I asked, wiping grime from my face. "The engine room? The nursery?" Elias corrected. "Where the Star City touches the earth." We rounded a corner and stopped dead. The tunnel opened up into a cavern so vast I couldn't see the ceiling, but I could see what filled it. Suspended in the center of the void, held in place by massive chains made of that same black organic metal, was a sphere. It was huge, maybe the size of a football stadium, and it was made of glass, or something like glass. Inside the sphere was a city. It was breathtaking and terrifying. Spires of crystal rose from a surface of silver liquid. Bridges of light connected floating platforms. And moving through the streets of this miniature world were thousands of them. The tall men, but they weren't monsters here. They were citizens. I saw smaller ones, children maybe, playing in plazas of geometric light. I saw them tending to gardens of fractal plants. It was a civilization, a perfect, hermetically sealed paradise. "It's beautiful," one of the wakers whispered, tears streaming down her face. "It's a parasite," Elias spat. "Look closer," I squinted. At the base of the sphere, where the chains connected to the rock, there were pumps. Massive, throbbing biological pumps. And feeding into them were the roots. Our roots. The black veins carrying the life force of the thousands of sleepers we had left behind. They weren't just farming us for energy. They were using us to terraform their own dying world inside that bubble. Every harvest, every missing child, every Jane Doe added a little more time, a little more light to their artificial sun. "We have to break the glass," I said, racking the slide of my mental shotgun. "It's not glass," Elias said. "It's condensed time. You can't shoot it. Then how do we stop it?" "We don't break the tank," Elias turned to me, his eyes burning with a fierce intelligence. "We poison the water." He pointed to the main pump, a pulsating mass of valves and arteries, right at the edge of the precipice. "That's the intake. If we can overload it with chaotic emotion, with the dissonance we used in the tunnel, we can cause a feedback loop. It will shatter the containment field. But that will kill them," I said, looking at the alien children inside the sphere. "All of them." Elias grabbed my shoulders. "Frank, look at me. They have been eating us for centuries. They stole your Lily. They stole me. They stole every person standing behind you. This isn't murder. It's an eviction." I looked back at the sphere. I saw Lily, the thing wearing Lily's face, walking along one of the crystal bridges. She looked happy, peaceful, but then I remembered the real Lily, the terrified 5-year-old in the red coat, the girl who died alone in the dark, so this city could have another day of sunshine. "Let's do it," I said. We charged. The bridge to the pump was guarded. 2 tall men materialized from the shadows, their limbs long and deadly. But they weren't prepared for us. They were used to sheep, not wolves. The wakers swarmed them. It was brutal and short. The tall men swiped and burned with their light, but the wakers didn't care. They piled on, tearing the guards apart with a savagery born of endless nightmares. We reached the pump. It was warm to the touch, throbbing like a giant heart. "Everyone," Elias shouted. "Hands on the valve. Push everything you have into it. Hate, fear, pain. Give it all back to them." I placed my hands on the wet black surface. I closed my eyes. I didn't think about hate. I thought about grief. The long, hollow years of sitting in a car, watching a mother cry. The empty bedroom. The shoe in the woods. The sheer, crushing weight of loss. I pushed that sorrow into the machine. Beside me, the others did the same. I could feel their trauma flowing like a river, a tidal wave of human suffering crashing into the delicate, geometric perfection of the alien machinery. The pump shuddered. The hum turned into a scream. Inside the sphere, The lights flickered. The silver liquid ocean began to boil. The crystal spires cracked. The tall men inside stopped moving, looking up at their artificial sky in panic. "It's working," Elias yelled. "Keep pushing." But then a voice cut through the chaos. A voice I knew. "Frank." I opened my eyes. Standing on the other side of the pump, separated from me by the throbbing machinery, was Sarah. My Sarah. The mother. She looked exactly as she did the day Lily vanished. Young, hopeful, wearing that blue raincoat. "Frank, stop," she pleaded, tears in her eyes. "If you break this, you break her. Lily is in there. Her soul is part of the city now. If the city dies, she dies forever." I froze. My hands faltered on the pump. "Don't listen to it." Elias roared. "It's a trick, a defense mechanism." "Is it?" Sarah stepped closer, reaching out a hand. "Look at the city, Frank. Look closely." I looked. And for a second, the alien architecture shifted. I saw faces in the crystal. I saw memories in the light. I saw Lily, playing on a swing set made of starlight. She was laughing. "She is happy, Frank," Sarah whispered. "She is eternal. Don't take this away from her." I wavered. My grief, which had been my weapon, was now my weakness. Was I saving her? Or was I just destroying the only heaven she would ever know? The pump began to stabilize. The cracks in the sphere started to seal. "Frank!" Elias screamed, his voice desperate. "They are playing you. That isn't Sarah." Sarah is in a hospital in Seattle, staring at a wall. I looked at the woman in the blue coat. "Sarah?" "Yes, Frank, it's me. What was the last thing you said to me before I left for the cabin?" She smiled, a warm, loving smile. "I said, bring her home." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. My grip on the pump tightened. "Wrong," I said softly. "You said, she's drawing circles." I racked the mental shotgun one last time. I didn't aim at the pump. I aimed at the woman. Bang! The image of Sarah shattered like a mirror, revealing a writhing gray mass of tentacles and eyes. A guardian. A psychological parasite. I screamed a soundless roar of fury and shoved my hands back onto the valve. The feedback loop hit critical mass. The pump exploded. A shockwave of black ichor and purple light blasted us backward. I hit the ground hard, my vision swimming. Above me, the sphere screamed. It was the sound of a world dying. The glass shattered. The star city fell. It rained down in shards of impossible light. The crystal towers crumbled into dust. The silver ocean evaporated into mist. And the tall men, they didn't fight. They just faded. Like dreams upon waking. I lay on the cold stone floor, watching the apocalypse of a miniature universe. I saw the light of the artificial sun wink out. And in the darkness that followed, I heard a sound. Not a hum, not a scream, just silence. The beautiful, empty silence of a closed case. I closed my eyes. "We did it, Elias." There was no answer. I sat up. The cavern was empty. Elias was gone. The wakers were gone. The pump was just a pile of melted slag. I was alone in the dark. Again. But this time, I knew the way out. I walked out of the cave system 3 days later. I emerged near a storm drain in Portland, miles from where I had entered. I was covered in black soot. My clothes were shredded, and I smelled like ozone and old blood. A homeless man under the bridge offered me a half-empty bottle of water. I took it. It was the best thing I'd ever tasted. The world hadn't ended. The traffic was still moving on the I-5. People were still buying coffee, arguing on their phones, living their lives. They had no idea that beneath their feet, a universe had just collapsed. They didn't know that the stars in the sky were safe only because a few dozen ghosts had decided to wake up. I made my way back to the car I'd abandoned near Oswald West. It had a parking ticket on the windshield. I laughed until I cried. A parking ticket. The banality of it was beautiful. I drove back to Chicago. I didn't stop at any mystery spots. I didn't look at the trees. I kept my eyes on the white line of the highway, the only geometry I could trust. When I got home, I expected the gray sedan to be there. I expected the men in suits to be waiting to drag me away. But there was no one. The surveillance was gone. The phone line was clear. It was as if they knew the game was over. The garden was closed. There was nothing left to protect. I tried to go back to my old life. I watched Jeopardy. I went fishing. I tried to forget the feeling of the black roots in my veins. But you don't forget something like that. You don't forget the taste of 1,000 souls on your tongue. 6 months later, a package arrived. No return address. Just a small brown box wrapped in twine. Inside was a shoe. A tiny sneaker with a worn-out sole. It was clean, not a speck of dirt on it. And inside the shoe was a note. It wasn't written in ink. It was burned into the paper. The harvest is delayed, not canceled. We have other fields. I stared at the note for a long time. Then I went to my closet and pulled out the shotgun. I sat on my porch and looked up at the night sky. For the first time in 30 years, I really looked at the stars. I looked for the patterns, the triangles, the circles. I looked for the cracks in the sky where the false light might shine through. They were just stars. Cold, distant, indifferent nuclear furnaces burning in the void. But then I saw it. Just for a second. A flicker in the constellation of Orion. A tiny purple pulse. I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who knows the war isn't over. It's just moved to a new front. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I had memorized, but never called. It was the number for a private investigator in Ohio. A guy who ran a blog about missing children in the Midwest. "Yeah?" a tired voice answered. "My name is Frank Miller," I said. "I have some information about the vanishing in Blackwood Forest. Who is this? How did you get this number?" "Doesn't matter," I said, racking the slide of the real shotgun this time. "I'm sending you a file. It's about agriculture, and you're going to want to read it before the next harvest." I hung up. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves of the oak tree in my front yard. It sounded like a whisper. "We are still here. I know," I said to the darkness. "And so am I. I'm not a detective anymore. I'm not a gardener. I'm a weed. And weeds are hard to kill. Case closed? Not a chance. The file is just starting to open."